Welcome to episode 74 of The Route, presented by Jobs in Sports. The Route is a glorified sports business coffee chat that has a new guest every episode as they share their route and experiences in sports. I'm Christopher Nascimento, and let's get started. So, on today's episode, before we get into our guest, just a few things to cover as usual. First, if you haven't followed us yet on social media, please do so at The Route Sports. That's on LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. I think that's it. But if not, we're there as well. And then following that as well, please follow and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. If it's on Apple, Spotify, Google, follow the podcast, rate 5 stars. And we're also now on YouTube. So if you're watching us visually on the YouTube channel at White Whale Marketing, just give us a follow there. And you can listen to all of our video episodes under the Route playlist. Now that that business has been covered, now let's get into today's guest. So joining us today for our guest will be the program coordinator of the Sport and Event Marketing Graduate Certificate at Fanshawe College, Bill Reid. Welcome to the Route. How's it going?
Great. Thanks for having me here, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining. The way I like to start every single podcast, same as usual, take us through your route. So maybe where did you go to school, if so, and then how do we get here today?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a little bit of my background. So I grew up in Niagara Falls, and when I went through school, I ended up deciding to stay more locally, and I attended Brock University. So I did my undergrad in business at Brock University, and shortly thereafter, just when I graduated, I ended up getting right into the workplace. So I accepted a job working for a large automobile manufacturing company, and my main kind of route, if you will, was through human resources management. So I spent several years in human resources, and it was around probably, I guess, the middle 2000s. I just continued to have this passion for teaching, and with the current state of manufacturing back then being a little bit of an up and down industry. From a job perspective, I just didn't know how long I was going to stick in that area of business. So I decided around that time that I wanted to explore other avenues such as education. I was looking at healthcare, government, and an opportunity came up to start teaching part-time at Fanshawe College. So I took advantage of that opportunity, and then speed things up a little bit. It was around the 2009 year that I ended up jumping on board with Fanshawe College full time as a faculty member, and I was predominantly teaching in the human resources programs. And back then we really expanded our HR programs. They brought the programs over from the Woodstock campus, and we started to develop and build a number of online deliveries and grad certs and those kinds of things. But it was around that time that I started to kind of grow a lot of opportunities outside of HR, and obviously with a growing family. So I have 2 boys, and I'm married to my wife, Tanya. We ended up, getting more involved in the sports side of things. And I had, played a lot of sports and been involved in sports throughout my life, and my family was heavily involved in sports. But it wasn't until that point in time that I started diving into the coaching aspect of things with sport that I started to get more seriously into the business side of it, and took the opportunity to kind of start my own hockey development business at that time. And so for the last several years, I had kind of maneuvered around my work career of teaching at Fanshawe, and as well just doing hockey development on the side. And over the last several years, that kind of grew into kind of mixing the two together a little bit. And then it was March 2020 that they were going to launch the new grad cert in sport and event marketing. And through discussions with the college, I thought it was going to be a great opportunity for me to jump in and be a part of that, right? So they asked if I would be interested in taking on the coordinator role for this program, which obviously I jumped at, and didn't know at the time that we were going to be running into a pandemic. But it was right at that point in time where everything just kind of, went sideways with respect to the situation in the world that we see today. And evidently we still launched the program, and in hindsight, it's phenomenal, right? I never expected we'd be where we're at today based on the circumstances that we had to go through. So the last several, months, I've been kind of teaching on the HR side of things, teaching in the sport and event marketing program, but as well spending a lot of time in the sport and event marketing arena, no pun intended, to kind of grow the program. And we've done that in a variety of ways. So we're really excited moving into the fall semester upcoming, hoping that things are going to continue to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. Interesting timing, right, with all this, but definitely seems like, no better timing, right, to just start, because as I've noticed since graduating, it seems like there's more and more certificates becoming available. And to be honest, I speak with students sometimes, and they ask, hey, like, I went to school for, I don't know, social science, history, maybe even business. Well, then after they kind of go into the job field, right, that's when it hits them, like, hey, I actually want to do something that I enjoy, right? So then that's when they kind of look back on it, like, hey, like, what can I do? And obviously maybe doing a full 4 years doesn't necessarily make sense after already having the undergrad degree, but there's some incredible value in them just kind of, looking at these different certificates, right? Whether it's, sport and event marketing. I know there's like sports digital marketing in Europe and different courses like that. So that's very interesting. But before we kind of dive into that, just a few things I wanted to ask, right? Because it is your route. You're talking about hockey development business on the side. Do you want to touch on that a bit more? Because also we did an intro with that.
Yeah, sure. I can touch on that. It was interesting how it all pieces in and ties together, right? So I spent a lot of time in the human resources realm of business, either teaching or working in training and development. And so I found there was a kind of a common approach or a common theme there with respect to hockey development and the training aspect of things as well. And then obviously that kind of rolls into the academic side of things of teaching and training. Mm-hmm. So I found that there was a significant fit there with respect to, not just being able to kind of teach skills and knowledge that pertain to the sport, but how you go about doing it and understanding learning principles and how, players will learn best. And I just think that there was a natural fit there with respect to my interest in sport, but also my background in human resources and training and development and business in general. So that to me has probably been the one area of that side of things that has allowed me to differentiate myself from others in the industry, is just, having the ability to be able to understand how people learn best and how to transfer skill, and how to teach in a variety of different ways that are going to allow for that individual to be, most successful. So yeah, that's something that it didn't just happen where I woke up one day and said that I want to do this, right? I always had a passion for business and wanted to kind of get involved in business from that aspect of things. But I wasn't the type of person just to go out there and say that I'm just going to set up my own business and that's all I'm going to do. So it just kind of happened on its own over a period of time, right? Mm-hmm. And then it allowed me to kind of intertwine a lot of the different things together that I was dealing with, whether it be, working at the college and teaching versus, training on the ice at night, just being a dad with my kids in sport, right? And supporting them through their ventures. So yeah, a lot of different angles that I guess I was kind of considering taking over the last several years that kind of got me to where I am today.
Yeah, no, that's definitely interesting, right? Where even just in regards to saying how your HR background has helped you, I find, I think maybe 2 weeks ago about 2 weeks after the Lightning won the Stanley Cup, at the time of this recording, I should say 2 weeks, because when this airs, it will be different. But when the Tampa Bay won the Stanley Cup, right, John Cooper was basically doing his media tour. And on some of the interviews I was hearing, you're hearing, let's say, his route as well, and how he kind of goes about, coaching and developing players. And it's much more different approach of, the typical X's and O's, rah, but it's more of, he's talking about how he kind of goes at it from like a law perspective, right? Because that's his background. So he really just tries to, make arguments or cases, right, to kind of motivate guys each day, rather than actually, just pushing every single guy against the wall, right? Because as you're saying, not everyone's the same, and you have to understand how they learn differently. So I definitely see that shift taking place in sport more and more. So that's for sure interesting.
Yeah, it's a really good point you raise, because touching on some of those experiences in hockey, I remember an interview with Mike Sullivan. I think it was about a year ago where, he was asked the question around, who runs the room? Like, is it the coach? Is it the player? You coach Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh, and how does that work? And his response was bang on, where he said, in today's game, it's a partnership. He said it's really about, the relationship that you have with your players, and not any one person kind of runs that room. You have to work with others. And that actually allows me to kind of expand a little bit and talk about the value of relationships. And that's something that I've tried to do across the board, whether it be for our sport and event marketing program or when I'm teaching in HR or just everyday life, is there's a significant need for valuing relationships in life. And I think that goes a long way with there again in our program at Fanshawe, trying to differentiate the skill set that the students can acquire so that when they graduate from the program, they're well positioned for success. And, we've talked, Chris, a little bit about it, I think, when we talked last time around the structure of our program. And, there's an internship component to it. And I talk to the students all the time about the value of relationship building and networking and, the definition of them and how it's not about, meeting people to get a job. It's about developing relationships that, can be sustained over a period of time. And as time goes on, I think that's where a lot of successes come by, the wayside over the last, several years. You can think back to how many people you've met, and some people you may not have had a daily conversation with, but how, time will go on, and then all of a sudden you'll tap into that person and you'll have another conversation, and circumstances change that allow us to present ourselves differently in a given environment, right? And just over time, it's evolutionary. So I think, terms like networking and relationship building and partnerships and affiliations, they go a long way in being able to properly understand them so that you can build on those for success over the course of your career.
Yeah, no, and that's an interesting point, because I guess maybe I'll even dive into myself a little bit here to kind of give more of a real example. So I went to school for business, and obviously everyone always says, including my dad when I was growing up, it's all about who you know, and he would take me to the different meetings. So yeah, I would learn things, right? But initially I started off in accounting, and there was such a need for accounting jobs that I didn't really see the value in networking at the beginning, right? Because I'm like, hey, I know I'll get an accounting job because every company, needs an accountant essentially, right? Or that service. And then when I made the shift to marketing, because I was like, hey, accounting is not really me, and I can't do that for the next 50 years of my life, and made that jump. That's when I'll say it, a sense of panic hit me, right? I think most students, because I was talking to some last week, where they're like, oh, wow, I have 2 years, 18 months, 1 year left in my academic career, and then I'm going to the real world, as people say. And they're like, I don't know anyone, right? And I'm not in accounting anymore, right? Where now I'm going to sport marketing, and it's actually not, a vast opportunity of jobs. It's actually very minimal and very competitive, right? And that's when I actually learned, oh, wow, I need to make up for this lost time and, start networking, meeting people, understanding their routes, experiences, and kind of take away from that. And I guess one of the things that I've learned, there's a question at this, I promise, that as I've learned from this, right, the students that I may have interacted with, some of them who tried really hard, got amazing grades, when it was actually time to go into the real world, they struggled with relationships. Whereas myself, I maybe put more emphasis on the relationships than the actual, grades. I think now that's starting to show a bit. So my question essentially is, how are you guys maybe helping students to have that balance, right? Because, it's essentially, obviously the degree is amazing and so is the certificate, but it's actually what you do afterwards, right? That makes it count.
It's an excellent question, and it's something that it has been evolutionary for me over time, because I'll tell you, when I came into this program, being a brand new program and coordinating the program, from an academic background perspective and, just starting from the ground up to build the program, the one thing that was surprising to me was actually personally was how easy it was for me to build a platform for students to be successful off of. What I was most challenged by the first year was the fact that just because you build it doesn't mean they'll come. Yeah. Right. And what I mean by that is that there's that initiative piece that you have to kind of nudge the students a little bit to be successful. And some of that, it's not to disrespect the students' perspective. It's the fact that some of them they don't know at that point in time, right? They're new to the industry. They're not sure how to approach it. They don't want to do wrong things. So it's, I guess, building a culture in the program around valuing a level of initiative that the students are going to need to be successful in the industry. So that's something that allowed me to kind of change things, the approach a little bit. So I guess a perfect example is I'm not going to just find you an internship. I want you to do a little bit of legwork to try and find your own internship, right? And I'll be there to support you. But I want you to show that initiative, because as you would know in this industry, desire and drive is essential to be exercised on an ongoing basis to continue to be successful in this industry. And of course, we have a little bit of luck on our side and things that'll come, by that circumstance to assist with you being successful as a student. But yeah, it's basically creating a culture in the program that is going to be supportive, but it's going to be challenging as well. And I think that's something that it'll take time. It doesn't just happen overnight, but that's kind of the path that we've taken.
Yeah, no, that's definitely interesting, right? Because I know I've said this on other podcasts or episodes, I should say, where, it's a weird dynamic, I guess you can say, right? Because, growing up, everything's kind of maybe, let's say, giving you, hey, Chris, what's the answer to this question? 2 + 2 is what? And you're kind of going about it. And when you get to a certain level of academics, I guess you can say, they're like, hey, do this work, do this assignments, get these grades, but to actually get the job, that's on you, right? And then the networking, all that stuff is all like self-motivated, like you're saying, right? So then there's these wine and cheese events, and you're like, oh, like how do I interact with, an executive, or how do I interact with a manager? Obviously, it's a learning curve, but it's definitely interesting. So it's interesting what you guys are doing with your program.
Yeah, it's something to add on to that as well. It's something that is really important to us from the academic side of things in this program is, at Fanshawe, we talk about how much we value experiential learning and signature innovative learning experiences. And so all of our courses are developed in a way where we strategically align the learning objectives of the course and the program to what the students are going to need to be successful in the industry. And we learn a lot through our program advisory committee meetings and meeting with industry professionals to really truly understand what is it that students are going to need to be successful out in the workplace. And so we're constantly going back and looking at our courses and looking at our learning objectives and, the projects and the assignments that are created to try and emulate some level of kind of transference that students are going to be able to say, I like how we did this in this course because that I took that as value added in, being able to put it in my toolbox for me moving forward to go out into the work world.
Yeah.
Right? So those are things that are more of the strategic side of the academic planning and programming to really ensure that you give the students the best opportunity for success when they graduate.
Yeah, that's interesting you mentioned that, because that's another weird dilemma that I had with academics, right? Obviously, I think I got a great degree, honors Bachelor of Commerce, that opened some doors. But maybe since it was more marketing, obviously, I think maybe the theory and the way my critical thinking has evolved, that's obviously a big help. And obviously, there's some other areas that also help me grow my marketing skills. But what I did notice when I kind of left school was, oh, wow, a lot of this is going to be me learning on my own, right? And to be honest, this podcast website was from a class. So the website blogging, that was from a class. So that was great. But the blog and esports tournament that I started and different things, that's where I learned most of my sports marketing skills, let's say, right? Because I'm actually taking a brand and growing it and gaining an audience and then, trying to sell it to sponsors, et cetera, and identifying, the different demographics. And that experiential learning, I should say, that's where it actually started evolving and, making me a better marketer, right? So definitely interesting you guys say that. Yeah,
it's so true that, it's been commonplace for years how we often talk about the college environment being really focused on experiential learning. But what I've noticed over the last, I would say 5 years, maybe 5 to 10 years, there's really been a significant amount of growth in that area of development. And it's interesting because just a little story of what you're talking about. Like I remember when I left school and, got my first job, I was working in, large automotive company. And it was pretty much my first week on the job. I had an issue come up and So I opened the collective agreement, I started reading through it, and I couldn't figure out what I was reading, right? You got to kind of learn through experience, right? And that's where you get comfortable with it. And I remember going into my boss's office and talking to him about the scenario, saying, I'm just wondering how I should approach this. And I remember him saying to me, like, well, what's our past practice? And I said, well, what do you mean, what's our past practice? And he says, well, what have we done in the past in a scenario like this? And I said, well, I don't know. And he said, well, go find out. And I remember I left the office and I thought to myself, yeah, I remember learning about that in school, but now I'm trying to apply it. And I hadn't really experienced that. And remember, this is back 20 plus years ago. So I hadn't really made that connection between what I had learned and how it was going to be valuable to me in the workforce. And that's that paradigm shift that we need to achieve in education, right? Yeah. We need to not just understand what it is we need to know from a learning perspective, but how are we going to utilize that to be successful when we transfer out into the workforce? So that's something that's always resonated with me over time. When I develop courses, when I develop assignments, right? What are they going to learn out of this that's going to be useful to them in the future? Yeah,
no, that makes a lot of sense. And as you say that, I think in my 4th year of university, it was all, final marketing classes, 4th year, right? And every single class was practical, right? So there was no more theory. I don't think we even had lectures. We had, competitions. We had, I think my marketing strategy class, we went and worked with Badminton Canada. That was the company, the NGO I chose to work with. And we actually developed a marketing strategy for them, right? And I think that last semester alone, where I had all my core final marketing classes, that's when I actually felt like I learned the most, right? The other 3.5, or was it 3.5? Anyways, however many semesters there was beforehand, it was that one semester that I felt like I got all the value, right? Where I had this digital marketing class where they gave us a website, a blog, and they're like, hey, brand yourself. And this is how I shifted myself from an accountant to a sports marketer and just branded myself that way. And that's how my business evolved, where it kind of gradually became that, hey, actually, I think I can brand athletes now, right?
Right.
I think I know. But yeah, so it's very interesting. Just really like how far that goes and the value that I could provide.
Exactly. And, in this industry, there's a real variance in the type of work you can be a part of.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I have some students I've had discussions with coming into the program. They'll say, I like this area, I don't like that area. And I said, that's perfectly fine, because as you would know in this industry, some people may not like sales. Some people maybe like the digital side of things a little bit more, working with social media and working with maybe graphics design. Some may want to get into agency type work. There's a variety of different areas, I think, that are useful to explore. And depending on how people are wired, they'll have interests in some and not others, right? And even to the extent of, obviously, in a sport and event marketing program, we have some students that come in that have a significant interest in sport, whereas others have an interest in the event side of things.
Yeah.
So I found that was something that was huge for me personally, coordinating the program, to be able to branch out and reach out to different segments of the industry to make connections so that we can give the most variety by way of opportunities to students through internships, right? So whether we're talking to professional sports teams, like you said, NSOs, PSOs, if we're talking to event side organizations that maybe aren't as involved in sport but are more event based, concerts, things like there have been so many. I've probably got about, I would say, 400 to 500 different people that I've talked to in the last year. Yeah, and we've really grown the database, if you will, of opportunities for students. And what I really love too is the students have helped with that. So I have a number of students that come in and they'll just make reference to an organization where they say, I would love to get an internship here. So I'll assist them or help them through the process of making that contact and try to go about it the right way to develop that relationship to hopefully have success. And there'll be failures along the way, but that's just part of the learning experience as well, right? So they're all different perspectives that we have that we can utilize our approaches to best serve the students, and then that'll assist us with building that culture over a period of time towards success.
No, and that makes a lot of sense. And there's a couple things I wrote down that I want to touch on the last point. But the first one was in regards to, let's say, interests of students, right? How maybe they come into the program and they're like, hey, my name's Josh, I want to go sports marketing, right? Or hey, I don't want to do sales. And to be honest, I knew I wanted to get into sports marketing, maybe more specifically. And there's maybe a category of different areas, right? Maybe sales, business development, sponsorships, and then marketing, or even like business intelligence. Those were the areas that I wanted to get into at the base, and maybe like go to my final destination. But right, I think, and for those listening, because I was even speaking to one of the guys that worked with me about this last week, you don't really know until you actually go in and do it, right? So I had this whole plan. Hey, I'm gonna get in early, work really hard, jump to manager, director, etc. Hopefully by 30, so forth, and then I'll do like a sports marketing agency. And then once I was there, obviously I enjoyed it, but it wasn't necessarily what I thought it would be. I enjoyed it, but you really learn from doing, right? And as much as you want to paint in your head that, hey, I love sports sales or marketing, social media, etc., for a sports team, as I said to one of my team members last week, go ahead and try it, but you're gonna learn a lot, right? Maybe you're gonna be like, hey, actually, I hate social media. I want to do ticketing, right? Because I want that human interaction. So there's a lot of things, right, where I'm glad that maybe even your program, right, you don't just generally specialize in, hey guys, we're only going to get you internships here, or we're only going to teach you about this or that, right? But giving more of a broad perspective, because in reality, you're not going to, you know what, we had a podcast this morning too, and he said this perfectly. Whatever you start in, it's not where you're going to finish.
Right.
So as much as you think when you start your career, you're going to be working with the Senators and ticketing, good chance you're not going to end your career in ticketing with the Senators.
Right.
So
it's a fascinating point that you raised, because I've had that conversation with students. Some students, they may corner themselves a little bit where they're looking for an ideal opportunity to secure an internship. But what I try to help them understand is that it's more about the relationship than it is about that specific opportunity. And what I want to make sure that students don't do is they don't continue to turn down opportunities that present themselves, and then end up where they are just struggling to actually get an internship, right? So a lot of that is building, kind of putting the building blocks in place for the students so that they're going to be able to be most successful through their experience at Fanshawe College in our program. So a lot of them, I think, have learned in the last year. I mean, it was our first year in the program, but a lot of them have seen the value in how they approach securing an internship, because I keep on telling them, when I come across an opportunity and I can put it out there to the students, I'll let them know how valuable this relationship would be depending on the organization or what type of work they're going to be doing. And it was interesting that you mentioned that about the type of work, from an academic side of things to the actual workplace does differ quite dramatically. I know when I started in human resources, I remember back when I was in university, I remember going through, the 7 or 8 functional areas of HR and where I would probably want to work and not want to work. And I remember my bottom 2 that I thought from an academic side of things that I was disinterested in was labor relations and health and safety. And evidently in my career in HR, I spent all of my time in labor relations and health and safety. And I actually enjoyed it, right? So the academic side of things wasn't as enjoyable for me. But when I got into the workforce, I really liked it, right? So that, I think the same is where you were going with in that point was, I want them to understand that it may not be a perfect fit, but you learn either way. And I remember always saying that I learned a lot from experiences that didn't work out so well, just like those that did. So, just because you have a great internship doesn't mean that's the only way that you're going to learn. Sometimes it allows you to kind of understand that, maybe I don't like this area. I would rather be in another area of sport, right? So yeah, those are just a few tidbits of information that I can kind of pass along based on value creation over your experience through a program like ours.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I completely agree and have felt that as well. And And I guess one of the things that you also touched on, which I think would provide value to myself and even those listening, is, you're talking about when, at Fanshawe, you guys are creating this database of opportunities, right? And, you're constantly networking, building relationships. And obviously, I think that's great because then that allows you guys to, provide opportunity to the students. But even, let's say, because I know directors, even managers of sports teams are listening. And, even myself, when I go, after this meeting, I'm going to go to, working on partnerships, right? And a lot of that is, relationship management, finding new leads, etc. So maybe you can share what are your, I don't want to use the word tactics, let's say, but what is your method of, getting in with a cold lead, let's say, because
it's a timely question. It's actually really good because one thing that we did in this program, and I had a lot of very good conversations with people in all different levels and organizations, and one thing that I found, now mind you, this was when we launched during the pandemic. One of the challenges was a lot of the conversations that I had with organizations, I felt that maybe they were a little bit apprehensive to make a commitment at a point in time where everything was so crazy with the pandemic, right? And I was often kind of having those conversations around partnerships and partnering with our program. And it wasn't until I started talking to a few large organizations where they would respond saying, we'd love to be a part of it, but our partnerships are more financial and big contracts. And so basically what it did was it allowed me to take a step back and really explore how we were approaching this. And I actually just overnight, I changed my verbiage and I just went from discussing partnerships to discussing affiliations. And what I did was I started talking to organizations in a way where I was saying, we want you to be involved in a way that you're most comfortable, whether that be providing an internship opportunity to students, guest speaking, even teaching in our program. There are a variety of ways to be involved, right? And they loved it. Most organizations said, yeah, we'd love to be involved. We just don't know what we can tolerate right now. So I said, that's perfectly fine because any involvement is going to be better than no involvement.
Yeah.
And we ended up kind of strategically taking an approach where it was going to allow us to grow the landscape of our program and surround ourselves with organizations that were from a variety of different industries. So making sure that, I didn't just have my hockey hat on and going after organizations that were involved in hockey. We're reaching out to, whether it be tennis, golf, maybe outside of the sports side of things, looking at more event-based programs that, a film festival, for example. So really trying to grow the and differentiate the opportunities for the students. And I'm glad I did that because we did have students come into the program and say, I'm not sure if I'm in the right program. I like film. I like the arts. And I said, you're definitely in the right program. We just have to kind of, help you through, the program in a way where we're going to be able to get the contacts and grow your kind of personal brand, like you had talked about, to position themselves for success, right? And I think that's been very helpful and useful in our program. Now, mind you, our first year we had small cohorts come in, right? In part because of the pandemic. So our numbers are fairly low as opposed to some of the other programs that are out there throughout Ontario that would be more seasoned and have, hundreds of students in their program. So it's a little bit of an experience as we grow, but we just have to be mindful of where we're at and the challenges that we have sitting in front of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes sense, right? And that's sometimes I enjoy, right? Where, last week I was just going for a coffee chat with someone. And then even, this morning, one of my other meetings, just asking a simple question in regards to partnerships, which is fairly directly related to relationship management, right? Even if it's person to person. And each time I find I have a conversation about someone regarding partnerships or, relationships, etc., there'll be little tidbits that they'll say, right? Where I don't even, they don't even think about it. Like, they're like, oh, we do this. And then, for instance, last week, they're like, oh, we use this software. And then that's something that we've been looking at for 2 months. We're like, hey, like, what can we use? And then he just mentioned that in passing. I'm like, that's it. That's the solution that I was looking for a specific problem, right?
Yeah.
Or even earlier, there's another conversation we're having where he just said something small and, I had to write that down quickly because I'm like, hey, I'm going to use this later, right? So that's very interesting. And then I guess in regards to, this could be directly relevant to maybe even a student or, a young professional listening. When you're mentioning how you do outreach to these larger organizations, obviously you're probably well connected, but what do you do for organizations that you do not have a lead to or a connection? Do you just use LinkedIn? Do you just do an email to the generic mailbox? Do you call? What are the kind of tactics you use to kind of get your foot in the door for the initial connection?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's, I mean, in today's social media environment, there's obviously, it's 6 degrees of separation, right? Like we're in a world today where I think, especially for large organizations, it's amazing how we start doing our research and exploring only to find that people that are connected or related to a certain organization or what have you. So from my standpoint, there's been a little bit of everything, right? So it really depends on the organization, how I approach things. I do think LinkedIn has been an exceptional tool, especially in this industry. Other industries, I mean, it's there for almost every industry, but I find in this industry in particular, there's a lot of significant use of LinkedIn and social media in general for that aspect of things. But yeah, that's definitely been advantageous, is going through, the social media connections. In today's environment, I find like businesses and people that work in organizations are so busy that it's very difficult for them to manage any general inboxes and things like that. So I find there's not a lot of response to that. You have to be a little bit more strategic in your approach, I think, when you're trying to reach out to organizations. So taking advantage of, networking opportunities, like just a plug for Primetime Sports. When I started, working through this program and knew I was going to take on the coordinator role, I attended the Primetime Sports Conference back in 2019 in Toronto. And that was of huge value to me because they have like a case competition in their event, and I was able to kind of see how that works and explore opportunities moving down the road as our programs evolve. Now with the pandemic, obviously that was kind of put to the sidelines a little bit, but moving forward, like I'm excited for that to get back going, because we can take a team down there for the case competition. We can grow our commitment and our affiliation to their event. And that's something obviously that, an event like that is where you can really expand your building of relationships and your involvement, right? So that just gives you a kind of a little bit of an understanding of how we would go about approaching it. There's not a one size fits all approach, I find. So it depends on, the connections that you may have, the size of the organization that you're looking to deal with. And the other big aspect of it too is, are they local or are they outside of the local area?
Yeah, no, I think that's some great advice, right? I find that's the most asked question we get regarding the podcast from people that listen, or even just people asking, hey, how do you get these guests, right? It's just simple things like that, where a lot of it I find, as well as in something that might be of value to students listening, is I think you may have mentioned this as well, and I think this is huge. It's kind of a value exchange, right? Obviously, there are going to be some executives or managers that they see a message on LinkedIn from a student, like, hey, sure, I'll go for coffee with you. And that's how I started my coffee chats. But eventually it does get to the point where they get so many inquiries to, go chat, that there has to be something a little more, let's say, right?
Right.
And what I kind of find, and I think this podcast does as well, is I'm getting the time to talk to someone like you, but then you also get this hour, and then once it goes out, to then share it, right? And grow your network, grow your brand, make more connections, right? So that's the value exchange there, right? And I know this is something that's going to be discussed in podcasts coming right before yours, is that, even though you're a student, you may not have necessarily a ton of value to provide at that specific moment, but you can simply do something simple where you send them a message on LinkedIn, not rather just, hey, connect. Because I know a lot of people just connect with anyone they can rather than actually sending a personalized note. I find doing a personalized note and actually maybe providing some type of value, whether it's, hey, come on my podcast, or, hey, I noticed if you guys tweak this on social media. Sorry about that. Yeah, classic. Good old days of working from home and all that, there's just
That's right.
FaceTimes and all that coming in. But yeah, just providing value, right? Whether it's, hey, I noticed on social media if you guys change this or that could be something of interest, right? So they're like, hey, you know what? Maybe this student can actually maybe say something useful that I could take on and provide to the business, right? So I think that's a huge thing.
Yeah, that's a good point that you raised, because they value creation and that exchange is really, really important. I often do the same thing when I'm looking to connect with organizations. Mind you, a lot of them are connecting with us now too, which is kind of the reciprocal nature of that, right? But what I do is I often look at it and say, how can we be of value to them?
Yeah.
So things like, if you go on our website, you'll notice that we have logos to the organizations that we're affiliated with. We've really, done our part, I think, to say, this is how we can help you. And if you can help us, there's a mutual exchange there. And I think that's huge in today's environment, because unfortunately we're in an environment where people are just so busy and they're so bogged down with requirements. There's always that need to establish a level of, whether you call them metrics or what have you, to really understand the work that you're doing. Is there some kind of ROI, right? Is there some kind of return on what you're looking to do, the work that you're looking to complete? And I think everybody, whether they want to say it or not, everybody is in a position where they have to give value, right? They have to add value to the organization that they're working with. So I always say that I'm gonna be a lot more successful if I can work with organizations in a way where I can benefit them at the same time that we're looking for them to hopefully benefit us.
No, I 100% agree. And that's something as well where I think when I was 16 or 18, I was watching a video on YouTube, and something just in passing that, the person in the video mentioned was, when you go for a job interview, it's not necessarily, hey, this job would be amazing, like I really want to work here. Hey, tell me about your benefits, your, what's the like work environment like, etc. Right? It's more of, hey, take me because I will be able to do this, this, and this, and it will improve your areas of business in these fashions, right? So then they're like, hey, like this person's actually bringing us value rather than us just giving them a paycheck, right? I think that's the way that people need to maybe position themselves, right, in interviews, right? Where it's not necessarily, hey, like I need this job, but it's more, hey, you need me.
Right? Yeah, it is a great point, because in interviewing, for that matter, like in the world of HR, I often tell students that when you go for an interview, it's not just about the organization interviewing if you're a good fit. A lot of it too is about you as the potential candidate interviewing the organization to see if it's a place you'd want to work.
For sure.
I think what that does too is from an interviewing standpoint, it helps take the edge off a little bit from a nervousness standpoint if you're a candidate being interviewed, where there are times where people go in and obviously say, I really hope they like me, I really want this job. But at the same time, you want to be able to ask questions as well, right? Because from a realistic job preview standpoint, you don't want to end up taking a job that, you're in there day one and you go home after your first shift and you just say, I don't like this. This isn't what I thought I signed up for, right? So so it's a neat kind of tidbit of information from an HR perspective. And just to expand on that a bit, just quickly, that's something that I've loved bringing the HR side of things to this program, because I just see the significant value that's attributed to interviewing, the networking piece, relationship building, a lot of the intricacies that are associated with the workplace, regardless of what industry you're in, that are going to allow you to differentiate yourself from others, right? And I think that's going to go a long way as well in developing our program as we move forward.
Absolutely. And that's kind of the same thing, right, where we were talking about earlier, where, sometimes just because you get a degree in, let's say, marketing, doesn't necessarily mean you can only provide value in a marketing position, right? Where, I didn't necessarily understand this until more recently, where someone who has an English or maybe communications degree and actually know how to, express themselves correctly and efficiently, they're going to do some damage in whatever line of work they go into. Obviously, maybe math, it'll be a little different. But in regards to marketing, someone who can actually communicate, that's where it actually provides value, right? Where it doesn't always necessarily need to just be a marketing student getting a marketing career, or someone like yourself, someone with an HR background only working in HR, right? Because then you can provide these different perspectives, which, like you said, provide value. And to kind of wrap things up, I have one funny story just in regards to what you're saying, because I just remembered this now. My friend, when he was 18, he went for an interview. Everything was going really well. And then I think he asked something, like, hey, what's the lunch situation here like, or something like that. And then as soon as he said something where it was more in regards to just what can he take or something like that, where he was more interested in just having a good time at work, they're like, hey, I don't think you're like the best candidate for us. So I thought that was funny. And in my head, and the way he says it's much funnier, but it was funny how he saw someone walk with like a free bagel and that caught his eye. And then that's what sold him. But then, yeah.
It's a funny story, yeah, because I always say one of my sayings, I always say it's not hard to stand out in the world, good or bad.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's one of those things where if you just put in the work and put in the time, you'll set yourselves apart. You'll set yourself apart from a lot of others that you're competing with for jobs, right? But you also have to be careful of that as well, right? Because sometimes if you approach things too lackadaisical, then sometimes it can come back to bite you, right? But my message to students, in our programs or people going out into the workforce is that it's not all about the academic side of things and how high your mark is in a course. A lot of it is about the the emotional intelligence that you can build on and develop over your experiences to position yourself for success in the industry. And I know we're going to wrap up here shortly, but I remember the interview when I was at the Primetime Sports Conference back a couple of years ago. Gary Bettman was interviewed, and they were asking him around question around, what is it that you see as value to gain a position that's a high level position in the industry. And I mean, obviously him, in his commissioner role and things in the NHL, a little bit different level than a lot of people would probably be getting to. But, I thought it was interesting that basically the first words out of his mouth was, you got to be lucky, right? He goes, you do have to be lucky. He said, you have to do the work. You have to put the work in. And he said, yeah, you have to be willing to invest the time to be knowledgeable in the industry that you're in. Mm-hmm. And he also touched on the metric side of things, right? And the return on investment and numbers. And there were a lot of assets of his approach that, like, you would think that different people in their response would offer a different level of insight to what's most valuable to you versus somebody else. But it probably is the same no matter what level you're at in an organization, that there are key foundational principles that you have to be focused on to be successful. And sure, from a strategic standpoint, things would change at different levels in organizations. But realistically, to break your way into the industry, you've got to have a little bit of luck, but you got to put in the work too, right? And I think that's something that if we can teach students, the fact that they're going to need to put in the work to differentiate themselves from others, that's going to go a long way in substantiating a level of success that they're going to be able to build on as they venture through their careers.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Where I think personally would really made the difference for myself and maybe allowed me to get lucky, because I think sometimes luck comes from the opportunities you put yourself into, right? That just the personal branding and attaching my name to sports marketing, right? And just pushing that agenda, let's say, that's what really made the difference. And, obviously ever since then, which was, I don't know, years ago, that's what actually allowed me to, break in, and then more opportunities kind of develop from that, right? So I definitely agree with that. And then I guess the last question I really have, and I asked this to everyone at the end, obviously, like you said, you work for, Fanshawe College. You're also a father, and you also, help out with hockey development. So you have a bunch of different hats on, right? So I'm sure you've had a lot of different life experiences. But let's say you kind of go back in time, speak to a younger version of yourself, even to maybe myself, or even any, first year student listening. What is some life or even potentially career advice that you wish you knew at, let's say, 16, 18, that you think has made a major impact on your life and you wish you knew earlier?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think the one thing, as you asked that question, the one thing that jumps out to me is just something that I often talk to people about, especially the last few years, around, going into the workplace and getting a career job. I said that window of your career is actually, like, we see it as, retiring years down the road. Well, it actually goes by really quick. Mm-hmm. And what I tell people all the time is that what you value when you enter the workforce compared to what you will value years down the road significantly changes.
Yeah.
So by that, I mean, like, when I often ask students in class, I'll say to them, how many of you want to make as much money as you can when you graduate? Now everybody puts up their hand, right? Everybody wants to make a lot of money. And I often say to them, that will change as time goes on. So what happens is you will develop a desire to maybe stay geographically in a certain area. You may develop a desire to maybe be more focused on pension plans or be more focused on benefit entitlement in the workplace as opposed to just salary. Obviously, time off comes into play with respect to work-life balance, especially for our younger generations, right? Where there's a little bit more emphasis of value on that than there was with Gen Xers or, anybody that, kind of like all of our parents, right? Like, I remember they say a lot of people that have parents now that are in their 70s or 80s even, back in their careers, they didn't work for multiple organizations, right? A lot of them worked 30 years with one or maybe worked with two. Well, now the average person is going to work for 7 organizations, right?
Wow.
Just by nature of what we're dealing with in our society today. But what I often tell them is that, it's not just about money.
Yeah.
Right? What it is it's about life. It's about, comfort. It's about value. So I just kind of give them the heads up. And when you ask that question about, if we went back to our younger self, that wasn't something I thought about when I was younger. I never really saw as much of the value in, benefit entitlement and vacation and pension plans.
Yeah.
So in geographical, like when I left the auto industry, I could have stayed in it and I could have relocated anywhere around the world or through the US, but that wasn't a desire that our family had. Like I wanted to stay in the region, in the area. So that was one of the things that I was considering in moving forward and making a decision. Do I stay in the industry? Do I look to go to another industry or what have you? Right.
Yeah.
I guess that's my point is that you want to just be aware of the fact that what you value as a younger individual will change as you get a family and as time goes on, right? You're going to start looking down the road. Next thing you know, it seems like it was just yesterday you started in your industry and then you're looking maybe 10 years out to say, whoa, I could potentially retire at that point in time, right?
Yeah.
So that's something to keep in front of you is understanding all the different facets of entitlement to a job opportunity as opposed to just looking at money.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because when I was younger, right? And obviously I'm still young, but when I was maybe in high school, right? My huge thing, I was like everyone, I would think to an extent, very infatuated with money, right? I want to make as much as I can in a short amount of time as possible. And maybe that was part of the reason I wanted to go into accounting, right? I also think I was decent at it. And surprisingly enough, the day that changed everything all, where I decided to actually leave to go to sports marketing, is the day they kind of offered me a position. I was in second year university. They're like, hey, Chris, when you graduate, we want to bring you on full time. So that was 2 years beforehand. And since I worked in salary, right, I was doing everyone's salary. I knew exactly how much I would make.
Right.
And I think I would have been 21 when I would graduate. It was like accounting job at 21 is pretty good pay. And for some reason, I always thought, hey, like that's what I'm working towards, that high salary at a young age. And then I don't know what happened, but it clicked. I'm like, I hate this. I can't do this for the next 40, 50 years of my life. So I actually quit the next day.
Yeah.
And then I changed programs. And then I'm like, hey, I'm going to work in sports because I'd rather just do something with passion or enjoy than actually make, whatever X amount of dollars from a 9 to 5. And I think that's allowed me to kind of change where now even when I talk to friends, and even though we're all in the same positions of life in terms of age, my biggest thing that I asked myself when I was in that 24, 36 hour span was, hey, if someone gave me $1 million right now, what would I do for work, right? Money's not involved.
Right.
And then that's when it hit. I'm like, I do sports marketing. So I was like, okay, well, I don't have $1 million, but that's what I'm going to do because money will come. So I completely agree with that where, it's not what's going to make you, enjoy that job anymore, right? It might make you hate it more because you're like, hey, they're paying me this much, but I absolutely hate it.
Yeah, and it's funny how you went back to where we talked about, I guess, 40 minutes ago when we talked about the experience component and how you learn through the experience, right?
Yeah.
Like, remember how I said it's not the all the good, and it can be some bad too where you learn, right? So sometimes you do something, you say, well, I don't really like that. I'm not going to go down that path. So yeah, I think life experiences, a lot of them will help kind of dictate what direction we're going to take over time. And, for everybody, I think some learn early. Like I know when I was in high school, I knew I wanted to be in business. I just wanted to be in business. That was something that I liked. But it wasn't until I think it was interesting. I think I was 19 years old, and I had already been through 3 organizations where I worked in retail as I was growing up and going through high school and university. And I remember there was a point in time, I think I was about 19 or 20 years old, and the store I had worked for had closed, and we lost our job. And I remember I got like a little bit of severance pay, and it was like back then it was like $300 in severance pay, which was like next to nothing, right? Because I hadn't been there very long. But for me to go through it and understand that, okay, well, this is how it works, right? They close, so people lose their job. And then now if I want to go to the store that's going to open in place of them, I have to apply for my same job back. But they can do that because I just lost my job because they closed, right? So that's what got me in at a young age to understanding the human resources side of things and termination and severance and all that. And that's what sparked my interest of liking that area of business.
Yeah.
I was a little bit different than you, I think, in with respect to accounting, because I was never one that was numbers based, right? Like I just couldn't wrap my head around that. Yeah. So some people are more wired for the number side of things. Some are more wired for the human element, like HR. Some, maybe more entrepreneurial and go down that path, or even, if you consider marketing in that realm. And some are finance based if they're numbers based, right? So I thought it was really interesting, but always through our experiences, it allows us to kind of grow our desire to take a certain path. Yeah. And that's why I think it's so valuable for students to really understand that simply by committing to something and trying something, it doesn't mean that because you fail at it that you can never go back and be successful.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And, I think just to end the podcast on the last note, that's, something I was reading, right? Whether it's good or bad experience, you're going to learn from it, and it's going to have, hopefully a positive impact on you if you live and learn, right? So I couldn't agree more. And I think this episode is great. Time has flown by. And unless there's anything else you'd like to share, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, no, not a problem at all. And I'm always glad to be a part of it down the road. But I really appreciate you taking the opportunity to invite me on today and being able to talk a little bit about my experiences and some of the hockey development side of things, as well as Fanshawe and the sport and event marketing program that we've just launched this past year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Take care.
Bye-bye.